differently, and now it becomes a big thing, and it creates a lot of stress and anxiety. And one of the reasons that this matters so much is, again, if we think about reasons why people might want to turn to drugs and alcohol if this is already part of their repertoire, is because that's a way of quieting that voice, right? That's saying, I shouldn't have done this, and I guess I'm just bad in social situations. I just shouldn't go out anymore. And you know, this begins to cycle, and so now you just think, well, maybe if I had a drink, I could go out, and so now you calm that cycle of rumination with some external force. And I think it's important to recognize that part of what happens is that cycle is common, and that there are actually lots of ways to stop yourself from doing that, most of which actually don't have to involve substances, right? I mean, this is why, we did a series of shows not long ago on mindfulness meditation practices and things like that, and while mindfulness is not the answer to everything, it is a pretty good answer to a lot of this rumination. Right? I mean, actually paying attention to the cycle of thoughts that you get into and understanding when you're getting into that, and then recognizing I can just allow moments to pass. I don't actually have to comment on all of them, and that I can actually calm myself. Breathe. You were talking about breathing, right? I mean, deep breathing is the antithesis of anxiety, because as you get anxious and stressed and you engage that sympathetic nervous system, part of what you want to do is breathe fast and get a lot of oxygen so you can go hit something or run from it. So that kind of deep breathing actually calms that system down. And so finding those techniques that allow you to calm that cycle of thoughts is yet another thing that goes into this. Again, right, there isn't an answer to, like, it would be great, it'd be so great if you could just say, okay, if a student comes in and they're struggling with alcohol, and you could just say, well, just do this, right? And that would be so awesome. But because it's this perfect storm, it's finding ways to address all of these pieces. And that rumination piece is a really important one, because if you don't find a way to quiet that inner voice, you want to stamp it out.
And one of the downsides about being bright and creative is that rumination, you can concoct the most disastrous scenarios. I mean, from this little event suddenly becomes, the end of civilization as we know it.
Then you can't even face the person that you said that. And then you see them, you run away, and they're like, what?
I know. Exactly.
Can we talk about this very topic around the issue of social media and the impact that has, especially now on anxiety and depression, and the way people are responding to one another and feeling about themselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it sets it off, right? I mean, so people are so willing to say things to each other over social media that they would never say, in real life. And of course, we don't then realize the reaction that we're causing in somebody else because we don't see it in that moment. So we make a nasty comment to somebody on their Facebook post, and we don't see the cycle that creates for them. And that cycle, there's two parts to that. First of all, it just can create that cycle of rumination, but then that comment is still there, right? It's still out there on social media. And so all you have to do is to go back to that person's Facebook page or to your Facebook page, and there it is again in black and white. So yeah, I think it creates opportunities for this kind of rumination, and it doesn't create easy ways to repair it, because you're not with anybody when you're engaging in this, generally speaking. I mean, sometimes people are all sitting around a table, all on social media, at a table together. But generally speaking, you're not, right? And so, rumination is a thing best done alone, because if there's other people talking in the room, it's hard to ruminate because you've got to follow along with their conversation. So social media also, I think, creates a little petri dish for this, right? Because it's an uninterrupted, healthy place for that to grow.
Yeah.
Not healthy for you, but healthy for the anxiety to grow.
And this is this is something that our culture has not learned to deal with, right? I mean, seldom do we communicate in absentia in a little 140 character, although it's more now, right? A tweet or something, right? I mean, I realized the other day I was talking to my students the other day, I said, God, I'm telling old man stories. But you know, when you wrote a letter, nobody would write a 140 character letter because it was too much of a pain. You know, either you wouldn't write a letter, or you really, you know, took the time to do it and think about it, and you had to read it over, and then you fold it and you put a stamp on it.
It took you 20 minutes just to carve the quilt.
Exactly, and then to find the ink. Anyway, so you know, all of that was a much slower process, and it was much more deliberative. And you know, when Art was talking about our emotions sort of telling us how things are going, right? Well, when we're having a conversation, or you know, we're sitting together, or we're in a room right now, I mean, we're interpreting each other's body language and our facial expressions and the comments that we make and all that kind of stuff. And this is all happening in real time, synchronously, right? And now, you know, somebody else is in another country, and I type something, and they may or may not see it, and then they're going to type something back, and there's no protocol, right? And when the protocols existed, you know, in written correspondence and those kinds of things, that created a certain kind of interaction among human beings. But no one's really created a protocol for this. I mean, you know, it's so interesting to me. I mean, all of us hate rules, except when things get out of hand, and then we think we need to have some more rules. You know, I mean, like everybody who wants, you know, shouldn't everybody be free to do whatever they want? And now there are electric scooters all over town that are being parked in doorways and running into pedestrians and that kind of thing. Somebody should make up a rule, you know, and that's always what happens, right? Yeah, there ought to be a law.
Isn't that like happening now?
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly, right? And so, you know, when you think about how social media has evolved, right, it's sort of like the fast food of human interaction, right? All the bad things about it are really compelling, you know? Like I can fire off something and boy, it felt good to hit send or whatever the hell the button is you push when you tweet, you know? I mean, I can have it right away, it felt good, it's really clever, you know? And maybe somebody's gonna like it, and I imagine all this stuff, and I have no feedback about anything. And what Art was saying before, when we learn to interact with people, we see how our actions are being received by the people we're interacting with. And because of that, we modify what we're doing in relation to what feedback we're getting from people. And now the feedback's gone, right? I mean, which is the same reason, and Art wrote a chapter in our book, Brain Briefs, which is available on Amazon.com. You always do that, but I thought I'd do well done. But about electronic communication and why that's a problem, right? For the very same reason, even an email or something like that, and even a phone call, that you can't see somebody's face, you don't really know, you might be able to detect some things in the tone of their voice, but all the things that take away signaling that human beings use to sort of govern their interactions with other human beings, the more of those you take away, the more likely it is that the communication is not going to actually do even what the communicator is intending it to do.
We just have a few more minutes. Does anyone have any?
I have a question. You guys implied that working with addictions and recovery is somewhat counterintuitive. Are there any particular approaches or new ideas that you guys would recommend or endorse?
Well, you know, whatever anyone does, it's got to be comprehensive. I mean, that's fundamentally, I think, the big thing is that it's you know, and I think that the comprehensive piece sometimes has to be built in collaboration. You know, that is you can't provide that for somebody else, right? What you have to do is to help them to build it, right? To build a comprehensive way of living their lives. And one of the challenges that faces all of you here is that you're taking kids who have just escaped the gravity of their parents, you know, and they're utterly free with no social structure and no life structure whatsoever. And for those students who are also struggling with addiction or just substance abuse in general, it's a lot of work for them to construct a reality for themselves. And I think and it's important for them to internalize that because they're trying to reprogram the slowest moving part of their brain, the slowest changing part of their brain, that they need a tremendous amount of scaffolding for that to work. And that to me, more than anything else, it's not so much a particular approach as for people to understand how deeply comprehensive this has to be in order to succeed. Yeah.
Ditto.
This question might be a little incoherent, so I'll try my best. But we had kind of opened this conversation talking about the construct of addiction and how that gets used in common parlance versus academically. And then also within our own circles, I'm also in recovery. And then we kind of moved to like touching on like the ideas of what recovery looks like in terms of success and meeting goals. And does relapse, can that be something besides a failure at recovery, right? And I think that's kind of skirting around issues of harm reduction, especially maybe for folks who are struggling with opioids and related substances. And so the question I'm kind of circling around, I guess, is someone, who's struggling with sugar, like, can that person also be an addict? And is recovery and failure perhaps like defined differently for folks whose the substances that they are addicted to are so deadly, so dangerous? Are there different things going on in the brain when someone consumes fentanyl versus sugar? So I don't know if you can get a question out of that.
Well, I mean, let me just say one thing in response to what you said about just the concept of addiction and how we all think about that. And a word you use, which people use all the time, is failure. I tend to avoid that word because it sounds so final. You know what I mean? I mean, like, I failed. Okay, this is done now. I'm on to the next thing in my life, or my life ends, or whatever it is, right? And I think, the words we use are not entirely determinative of how we think about things, but they certainly influence how we think about things. And I think when you think, well, I tried this and I failed, it's like, okay, I'm done. I put forth effort, didn't work, let's move on. And it sounds like I'm leading up to what word should be used instead. I don't have a word instead, right? But when we talk in art business, when we talk to students about challenges they're having academically, right? I mean, we know that what motivates a brain to update a memory is dissonance between expectations or intentions and outcomes, right? So mistake making, error, is the motivator for updating memories, for changing memories. Right? So it's like no error, no learning, right? So if you think about this in relationship to initiating any kind of new behavior, it would be completely unrealistic to think that any path that you set yourself on, or that anyone sets themselves on, to change something about themselves is going to be error-free, is just a fiction, right? I mean, error making, whether that has to do with a relapse, whether it has to do with whatever it is that you do that is not what you had intended to do, that is an inevitable part. So rather than creating this sort of false idea that if I just care enough and I want it enough and I do all the right stuff, this is never going to happen again. And then when it does happen, you're devastated because you think, I just mustered everything I've got and I still failed. Well, now, yeah, that's a pretty devastating place to be. But once you start to say, look, it's possible, and it may even be likely that I'm going to miss my target sometimes, But that doesn't mean I'm done, and it doesn't mean I'm going to stop. It just means that I now know I have more work to do.
But there's something else in this question.
Okay.
Well, there's this, I think the idea of harm reduction. I don't know, I don't want to ask a question that you don't ask, but I do think it's interesting to think about ways to manage different types of addictions because there's such different outcomes for being addicted to sugar than there's fentanyl.
Right. No, and what I was going to say was I think common across all kinds of addictions is the habit component, and I agree. I think that there are lots of things that differ across different circumstances. Some of which are, for example, if you have a, you know, if the problem for you is sugar, well, you can't avoid sugars for your whole life because that's just not an option. And so that creates a very difficult set of circumstances on the one hand, because you are constantly engaging with a substance that is still one that you're trying to manage, which means you have to both consume it and not consume it, right? On the other hand, its biggest danger is over a longer period of time, right? When somebody says I OD'd on cupcakes, they're generally not rushed to the emergency room, right? Right. I mean, so it's a, you know, so that creates one set of circumstances versus, for example, someone who could easily on a single, you know, with a single usage OD in a deadly way on an opiate, right? And so the, you know, the cost-benefit analysis there differs, and as a result, some of the strategies have to differ, right? And so, you know, I think a lot of what we talked about when we talk about habit change applies, I think, across everything that we discussed. You know, for people who are struggling with opioid addictions, right? Having support mechanisms that are essentially, you know, the equivalent of pulling the fire alarm, you know, in order to stop from doing something that could potentially be deadly today, is crucial. Is a crucial part of the social infrastructure that they have to create. Whereas, you know, for something where you're trying to create a sustainable, lifelong pattern of behaviors, the social structure still matters, but it's not necessarily the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. It's trying to create something where day by day there's a healthy and sustainable set of behaviors. And so absolutely the way that has to be structured is different. And this creates, you know, Bob was harping on the word failure. I want to play a little bit for a moment with the word addiction, right? Now we talked about it, you know, Bob talked about it earlier in terms of colloquial usage. And I think we all recognize that generally speaking, when someone says they're addicted to Game of Thrones, they mean something different. But I think that what we have to recognize is that, you know, addiction, just because we use the same word across lots of circumstances, doesn't mean that we are going to do the same thing for every single person who is struggling with their perfect storm of habits and reward structures and rumination and anxiety and resilience. And, you know, these are going to be different for everyone, and that's again part of what makes it so difficult to be people who are also helping others, right? Is that there is so much individuality in that, and absolutely what you have to do to try to prevent someone from re-engaging, for example, with opiates, is going to be very different than the way that you might treat, you know, other. I mean, even alcohol, which can be deadly for most alcoholics, still isn't deadly in particular usage context. It's deadly over time, and so yeah, I think you know, those things have to be treated. They have to be treated specially, and you know, and that's part of what makes this such a hard thing to do.
And I just want to add just one short thing. You know, the idea of preventing acute self-harm that can happen with something like overdose thing. I want to go back to what we were saying before about becoming a better noticer, right? Because the idea about pulling the fire alarm, the closer you get to actually using, the harder it is to decide to pull the fire alarm, right? And so the earlier you can recognize what path you're on and what can happen next and the next and next, so you recognize these instances that then often lead to something, well, now you're much more likely to pull the fire alarm way back here than you are like right before you use, right? And I think that becoming more aware of that, becoming a better noticer of oneself, and then knowing what support structures you have with family and friends and counselors and whoever else is around who's helping you, it becomes much more likely that you'll be able to take advantage of those. Anyway, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
And we've gone over and being respectful of everyone's time, we should probably wrap it up. But thank you all for coming. It was
Pleasure.